Hey, this is James, the founder of Sweetfish Media. If you've listened to B2B Growth for a while, you probably have an idea of what we're passionate about. Loving people really well, a constant pursuit of learning, and inspiring people to own their careers. With all the craziness happening with this virus, we are incredibly fortunate to be in the business of podcasting. So many B2B brands are looking for alternatives to their in-person events that are being canceled, and our business is growing as a result. Please don't mishear me on this, because I'm not saying this to brag. It is heartbreaking, the economic impact this is having on so many businesses. But being in the business of podcasting, the demand for what we do has increased. And because of that, we're looking to hire really talented people to help us serve that demand. So if you like what we're all about at Sweetfish and you're looking for a great career opportunity, hit us up. There's a link in the show notes where you can apply today. I'm really looking forward to meeting you. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. Today, I'm joined by Chris Walker. He's the CEO over at Refine Labs. Chris, how's it going today, man?
Great. Well, again, good to join you. Happy to be here and looking forward to chatting today.
Absolutely, man. James and I have been talking every so often. It seems like I see one of your posts more than every so often lately, because you've been very consistent on LinkedIn. You're very like-minded with us, trying to put out actionable, tactical stuff that gets to where the rubber meets the road. So I've been excited to have you on the show for a while now. Before we jump into things today, we're going to try and get actionable, not kind of, hey, drink water because you work from home, but in light of everything that's going on, what are some things that marketing teams need to be thinking about today? Break down a post that you shared earlier this week on LinkedIn. Before we jump into that, man, for folks who aren't familiar with you, haven't been seeing your content on LinkedIn, give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the team are up to at Refine Labs these days.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Chris Walker. I started this company about 12 months ago after working in several growth stage venture-backed companies and seeing the power of marketing, how that can accelerate growth for a company by lowering customer acquisition costs, shortening sales cycles, overall creating a more efficient growth model. And so now we are essentially an outsourced expertise for demand generation for growth stage software as a service companies that sell a product in the ACV range of 5 to 100K. So not too transactional, not too enterprise. We stay in this like middle place where I think the power of content marketing really, really can drive growth. I think it works at all spectrums, but especially in this little place, because companies that have too low of ACVs are going to be way too performance marketing based for my liking. And companies at the way enterprise level are going to be far too outbound sales, ABM sales, if you call it ABM, account-based sales focused, with marketers helping with that. And neither of those are really things that I believe in. What I believe in is produce super valuable, unique, original content, do it incredibly consistently, know how to distribute it to the people that you need to see it, which leads to increased brand awareness, subconscious product consideration for you all, and a lot more inbound opportunities that happen organically, therefore lowering customer acquisition costs and making a revenue engine more efficient. And so, in essence, that's what we do. We work with dozens of B2B SaaS companies to help them do that and continue to refine the model and add layers to the things that we do.
Yeah, man, as I mentioned already, so like-minded with us. I mean, we're serving a lot of the same folks in kind of that mid-market area, especially SaaS companies, as they're using their podcast to get in front of folks, consistently provide tactical, useful content. I just agree so much with the mindset that you guys have and how you're helping marketers today. Let's jump in and talk about, something I think we're all thinking about, and then we're going to get into the what to do about it. But, your post earlier this week on LinkedIn really kicked off with, hey, marketing budgets are going to start to be scrutinized, as is, every functional roles budget. But set the stage a little bit there and kind of what you're seeing and talking to your customers today. And then we're going to get into, what folks can start doing about it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think a great place to start is that this is not a prediction. This is just an observation of what's actually happening. So I speak to a lot of anything from marketing manager to CMO level people at a wide range of different types and sizes of companies, both hardware and software, recurring revenue model, growth stage, profitable, doesn't matter. And when the economy tightens up, which hasn't happened in a considerable amount of time, especially to this degree, companies will then start to scrutinize their expenses, which they haven't had to do for a very long time. And the first places that they're going to look are in variable expenses, not non-fixed overhead, not headcount. You're not going to be able to cut your office expense with a considerable amount straight away. So they're going to look at variable expenses. And the number one, the largest department with the largest variable expense budget is always or most often the marketing team. And so that's where companies are going to go first. They don't want to lay off people straight away. So where else can we cut? It's going to be in software that's in month-to-month contracts, and it's going to be in variable expenses, and the marketing budget are going to be the first places to look. And so for marketers that are going to be facing and having that discussion, you better be prepared with your metrics and your performance and your plans about how that money is being used and what the impact is, and relative to other things in the company, why you are making an impact that's greater than some of the other expenses on the P&L.
Yeah, I love it, man. The other thing that you mentioned that I thought was very timely for folks to think about, and there may be only, a certain number of things that you can do about this based on what your product is, but there may be things that you can shift or you can pivot a little bit. If your product or service takes a long time to onboard and you've got very long contract lengths, you've got a costly implementation process, you've got a complex implementation process, that produces a lot of variables, which creates, some fear and uncertainty, which is where, again, where cuts are going to happen. So you work with a lot of SaaS companies. What are you advising them kind of on this point right now?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think the people that are going to find the most impact on that side is actually consulting and service-based companies that are doing project-based work. Big website overhauls, 100K website overhaul is not gonna kick off tomorrow, in my view. Huge Salesforce consulting rebuild, probably not going to kick off tomorrow. And so some of those, I think those companies that are project-based, large deal sizes are quite vulnerable to having that cash flow be delayed right now. In terms of the SaaS side, I think that just because there is so much uncertainty in the system right now, that a lot of people, I think almost everyone right now is in a wait and hold position for at least a minimum next 2 to 4 weeks. And I think that things will become more clear then. And so to make this really actionable, like what can companies do right now? I think there's a couple key places that they should focus. One is really figuring out brand and content. I've been talking about this for 5 years. Companies, if this trend of what's happening continues, the companies that failed to become true experts in content, social, digital execution are going to really struggle over the next 6 months. It must be a core competency inside of every company. The next one would be product, continuing to move forward on product and build. Those are things that you have, looking at what you have control over, investing in product and differentiation, understanding customers and being able to move forward on that is something I think is super huge. And then last thing is just overall organizational efficiency, whether it's on the revenue side or other places. So people are cutting, softwares that are unnecessary or redundant or things like that to save money. But it's also like, I've been talking about this forever. It's like, look at your overall company and how it's generating revenue. You have variable marketing expenses, marketing headcount, SDR headcount, no matter where they fall, account executives, account managers, you have that. And so companies are going to get pressed and make decisions on what of those types of resources they need and how it needs to get reallocated. I think a lot of companies are going to find that their SDR teams are going to shrink. That was another point here. Given what's happening right now, I think we're going to see a further decline in the effectiveness of outbound selling. And so with that, I think companies will start to sense that, and that will be a place where they start to try and recover some costs from a fixed overhead perspective and reduce that. And so those are just some of the things that are going through my mind right now. And we'll just have to continue to wait and see how it develops.
Yeah, I like that you went there, man, talking about looking at all your go-to-market strategies, looking at outbound, looking at content and inbound.
Mm-hmm.
What you said there about, brands that are able to establish their thought leadership and their expertise to drive relevant inbound is just very top of mind. I posted just yesterday on LinkedIn, a lot of our producers who help manage podcasts for our customers are getting these questions. Should we delay our podcast launch? Should we stop releasing episodes? And the resounding answer from our team, which may sound a little bit self-serving, that, hey, keep going with your podcast, but truly I believe this, that you need to be putting out more content. We're in our houses, the content consumption, I've heard from people even just earlier today on LinkedIn, kind of anecdotally looking at the data, content consumption is actually going up. Meet people where they are when they're doing the dishes, when they're shoveling the sidewalk in front of their house, which sometimes those are the only things that we're doing right now. So tell me a little bit about where you see the role of content playing right now, and folks that are saying, well, maybe we should pull it back. Our thinking is you should be in front of folks and get very good at getting in front of folks in multiple digital channels efficiently, because you're actually going to win there, because you don't have events for that just standard, hey, we're going to be there, we're going to get that exposure. So digital seems even more important to us right now. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I rattle off this couple of things, the first one was content and brand, and not in the sense of brand like refixing your colors. It is, when I talk about brand, it's
Thank you for clarifying that.
Any marketing that doesn't require or is not measured on a direct attributable ROI, like a direct response paid media ad. And so like thought leadership content podcast, video podcast, blogging with the appropriate distribution. Like there's a lot of different ways that can be, that can come to life. I think it's like probably the most important thing that a marketing team could do right now. So look at the landscape, these are some of the things that I think are going to change right now. So you look at a marketing budget, like probably most marketing teams budgeted somewhere between 20 and 50% of their expenses this year on events, on trade shows or their own field marketing events or whatever. For at least the near future, those things are out. So where's that money going to go? There's a couple of different options. There's one option where companies are going to take that and they're going to hold it, because having a nice cash position is smart. So they might not use it. For companies that don't know how to use it, which I think there are many, that's what's going to happen. Another thing that I think is going to happen is companies are going to start to scrutinize their agency relationships. There is a lot of agencies that charge on a recurring revenue subscription and do not generate revenue. Just straight up. They are deliverable focused, are not revenue generating. I think those relationships will be scrutinized. And the third thing is I think that companies need to put more money into digital if they know how to execute. Otherwise, it's going to be money wasted, right? And so this is why I call it like getting on the treadmill for a marathon. Like if we're considering we're starting running a marathon right now and you haven't done any training for the past 5 years, you're not going to be able to do this. And so in that case, I'd recommend holding the cash and being smarter about that to understand where you can spend it. But for those that do know how to execute, let's assume that most people that are listening to this do know how to execute. It is go harder at content. Right now, it's actually quite simple. We're sitting here. We can create video content, you and I right now, in a podcast, and that can get redistributed. And then if you know how to do it well, you can use media to get that in front of the right people. And that's what we do every day. It just becomes a more important part of the mix, given how the landscape has changed. To close out, I think that must be a marketing team's top priority right now. Digital execution.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're kind of rounding out the conversation, but any quick hits for folks right now in things that you guys are thinking about in executing and making sure that your content is getting across the right digital channels, whether that's maybe specific to LinkedIn or paid, or just anything that's top of mind, even super granular, going either LinkedIn, paid media, or something like that. Any closing thoughts, tips that you think listeners to this that maybe are pretty good at execution, but you found something that's been a little tweaked, that's been a game changer for you guys that listeners might want to know today?
Yeah. So I want to get two topics in. So if you can hold that question, I'll get back to it. There was one that's kind of like looping back to the beginning, which is like, okay, so your marketing budget is going to start to be scrutinized. what are you going to present in order to demonstrate that the marketing is the most effective path to continuing to grow the business? And I believe that companies that market well, that marketing source revenue is by far the number one channel to grow if you look at it from a customer acquisition cost and a sales efficiency standpoint. The challenge is that most companies don't know how to do that or can't do that for whatever reason. The metrics that they're measured on, the lack of budget, the lack of talent, the lack of knowledge. So, but for the ones that can, your customer acquisition cost should be 2 to 6x lower on a marketing sourced funnel as opposed to a pure outbound approach. And also, I believe to be more scalable given the differences in those two. So I think the first thing that marketers need to do is they got to start breaking down their funnels by opportunity source. And so there's actually some within. So the core breakdown is inbound, outbound. On inbound, then you have to break it down into a couple other ops sources. It's like the way that I look at it is website sales conversions, by far the number one conversion in my view, which would be, I want a demo, I want a quote, I want to talk to your sales rep, or I inbound call you. How do you drive to that conversion point is the number one for me. The next one's going to be events. We can debate for, much longer than we have on this podcast, the effectiveness and the customer acquisition cost of that channel. But I think you should break that out, because people that just look at overall marketing CAC are missing the fact that the sales efficiency and customer acquisition costs inside of that bucket are very different depending on what you're doing. And so you have events. I would break that out and measure that. If you're doing syndication, I would go break out and measure that, because it's going to expose that syndication is not actually very effective relative to other marketing activities. And then you have the outbound side. And on the outbound side, you're just looking at the cost, the non-cost of sales. So that's SDRs and any other variable expenses to support that channel, right? So when we're doing these CAC, it's the lead generation piece of it, not the sales piece of it. So that's why I leave it out. It becomes more normalized. And so you look at those two buckets. And then once you're able to effectively split them out, you need to start looking at certain things. You need to start looking at win rate, sales cycle, average deal size, number of qualified opportunities generated, which will give you a pipeline velocity for all those different sources. We need to be looking at qualified pipeline contribution amongst those core sources. We need to be looking at overall expense across all those different sources, revenue contribution as a percentage of overall net new logo acquisition across all those sources. And when you start to look at all that information, and then you look at how much you're spending on all of those different channels, it should become very clear what the best path to growth is. For some companies that are outbound driven and don't know how to do marketing, it's going to tell them to do more inbound, right? Like if you're an athlete, you're better at basketball, then you're probably going to want to do more basketball than play hockey, right? Like that's just how it goes. So half of these are not blanket statements. It also has to do with the core competencies of your company, which is why it's really important to go and analyze the data and figure it out for yourself. And then if a marketer does find out, and often what we'll find is that the demo inbound sales conversion bucket is the most effective. People are raising their hands saying they want to talk to a sales rep, shorter sales cycles, all these different things. And so how do you design your marketing engine right now to move people to that conversion point without doing direct response ads to send people to get a demo? Because the difference between that is that the people that are filling out the demo form are doing it on their own. They're not being driven there. And so if you drive them there, you're going to get the conversions, but the metrics across that channel are going to go way down. And so the way that you do that is you create a lot of brand awareness up front, which then drives organic traffic in that conversion point. And that's podcasts, video podcasts, effective distribution, all the things that we're saying. And so as a marketer, everything I just mapped out, you need to know, you need to have in a dashboard, you need to be working with your marketing ops, your sales ops people, understand the data is right, so that when the CFO or the CMO or the CRO comes and has that conversation with you, you can have a very black and white, confident conversation about, okay, look, like, we're spending X here and Y here. Like, I believe that we should keep the marketing budget and we should actually cut 5 of those heads over there. And we should be spending more here because it's working the best. And so that's just one example. I really think that there are many companies that don't look at it at that level that really would benefit from doing that, because I think it would show them a lot of interesting stuff about how to approach not only the next couple months, but business forever.
As we talked about, I last thing I wanted to do was like, okay, everybody panic. Your marketing budget's about to be scrutinized. So like go wring your hands and stand in the corner. You gave people, I mean, if you're a normal 2X listener, you're probably either going to have to hit the back button a couple times or slow down to 1.2 or something. Like go back to what Chris just said, guys, and check that out. I really like what you said too about looking at, breaking down that inbound channel, because there are differences and there are going to be different close rates. There are going to be different percentages based on, where that's directly coming from. So that's all really good stuff. I love that we loop back to that. All right. As we close it out, being effective in those digital channels, if you want to share a couple, on LinkedIn, on paid ad strategy, something to kind of round out the conversation, give folks something that they could go and look at how they're doing it today and maybe tweak something today, depending on when they're listening to this. It's Friday now, but I want to say before the weekend. But anyway, something they can quickly and go take action on, man.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll kind of think about these as like the 2.0 listeners. So like the way that I think about this is, one, you must have a deep understanding of whoever you're trying to sell to. Otherwise, your content's not going to hit. So like I can speak in a very authoritative, thoughtful way to CMOs because I work with a bunch of them and I've been a head of marketing at a B2B company and I understand them deeply. And I think that I have advice that can be really helpful to them. Most people that are creating content are not in that position, which is why the content doesn't work. Step one. And then I think step two from there, if you're able to get to that point, is consistency, which is a place where people do not succeed. Content, especially in an organic social format, works because you do it frequently and consistently. And so I think, posting once a month to LinkedIn from your company page when you have 300 followers is just not going to get it done. And so from the consistency is next. So how do you create a framework where you can create a video, a podcast, a written blog, an infographic, a deck, whatever it is, at least once a day for every channel that you're trying to play on, which is why I always recommend for companies to find the number one channel and spend all their time there until they've exhausted that channel and then expand. Every other company, or not, that's an overstatement. A lot of people try and cover every channel really poorly instead of just doing one channel really well. There's always one or two channels that have the greatest upside. LinkedIn is one of them, especially in B2B right now. Yep. And so like consistency. And the last one that I think this is probably the most actionable out of everything is go back into all of your existing content and figure out how to repurpose it or reignite it. Take a blog, take 3 quotes from that, build a quote card, and then you have 3 posts a day on LinkedIn because all the content's already been created. It just needs to be reformatted and distributed appropriately. And so that's another one is like that old case study that you had, that old interview. Can you clip that old 30-minute interview into 10 different 1-minute clips and then push those out over LinkedIn in a consistent fashion? And then the last one is, if the content is good, how do you figure out how to put media behind it to get all the other people that haven't seen it yet to see it? Job title targeted, skill-based targeted, field of study-based targeted. Like the LinkedIn targeting is crazy. It's expensive from a CPM standpoint. If you can get to them on Facebook, maybe that'd be better, or Facebook or Instagram. But if we're focused on LinkedIn, it's like if you have a video or a post or a piece of content or something that's working, how do you amplify it with media spend that you have left over from the trade show the booth that didn't happen, or the field marketing events that didn't happen, or the other expenses that have been shut down? How do you put $1,000 down a piece of content that's working to get that in front of 20,000 more people that are like the people that have already engaged with it, and accelerate the consumption and the awareness and all the other things down the funnel that we're talking about?
Oh man, so good. Just a couple of resources I want to mention to folks that we can put in the show notes that go off of these, because you mentioned kind of 3 specific things here, Chris, to take action on. One, you've got to make sure you're understanding your audience and your buyers better than ever right now. If content really is your way forward to stay in front of them with events canceled and everything else. A couple of resources. James and I did an episode in our Behind the Curtain series about our SEO strategy lots of people refer to it as Google alphabet soup, a way to look at and leverage Google's auto suggest to look at search volume in addition to a lot of the other tools that folks are using out there. We also did an episode in our Why Podcast Work series where John Ruggie talked about how hosting a podcast helped to refine messaging because he was talking to people in a new space when he switched industries. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a podcast to that, but if you are a marketer, find a way to interview your best customers, find a way to interview your best prospects, whether it's a podcast, hopping on a Zoom call, whether you record it and then use it for a podcast later, which kind of goes to your point, Chris, about repurposing stuff, and then look at your existing library of content. We just did a website overhaul and we're looking at a lot of our core pieces of content. One of those on our content waterfall strategy might be helpful for some folks. So we'll link to that because it falls in line with what you're talking about there. And I just can't reiterate enough, just in our own experience, what we're seeing, it lines up with what you're talking about, Chris. For a long time here at Sweetfish, we've been obviously very consistent on the podcast, on B2B Growth, being daily there, LinkedIn. Other channels are not as much of priority, but we've seen that being very consistent in podcasts and being very consistent on LinkedIn, we're able to reach our folks. Now, those might not be the channels for you, but find that top channel, find those top two and make them work together in any way possible. Man, Chris, I could chat with you all day. We might have to come back to that event attribution conversation another time. We could possibly have you on the B2B sales show. I know you are consistently putting out stuff on for the sales side of the house. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. We'll have to find several ways to slice and dice this and share it. For anybody listening to this who wants to ask you some follow-up questions on the funnel breakdown that you did or follow along with your content, what are the top channels? What's the best way to stay connected with you, man?
Yeah, the best way to get me is to DM me on LinkedIn. I try to every message that is thoughtful and not asking for me to go take a demo or something like that is I try to get to every single one of them. So if you have something a question, and if it's a little bit deeper, we can set up like a 10-minute call and just go through and help you.
Awesome, man. Thank you for that offer for listeners today. And thank you for dropping some really tactical content for folks in light of everything that's going on. Really appreciate you being on the show, Chris.
Thank you, Logan. Everyone stay safe and stay healthy. We'll talk soon.
I hate it when podcasts incessantly ask their listeners for reviews, but I get why they do it, because reviews are enormously helpful when you're trying to grow a podcast audience. So here's what we decided to do. If you leave a review for B2B Growth in Apple Podcasts and email me a screenshot of the review to james@sweetfishmedia.com, I'll send you a signed copy of my new book, Content-Based Networking, How to Instantly Connect with Anyone You Want to Know. We get a review, you get a free book. We both win.